As a $43 billion corporation, we're spending about $10 billion a year on pay, stock, and benefits. Let's make sure we're getting the most out of it.
What is the science behind what we do? What is the art behind what we do?
How do you determine whether an employee values their base pay actually to the degree that they have it?
Welcome to WorkSpan TV. I'm Allison Avalos with World at Work. We're here today discussing transparency with compensation data. And I'm joined by Ragagli and Pearce from Intel. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you first start off by telling us what pay transparency is?
For us, pay transparency is really two components. It's about explaining to managers our base pay management system, helping them understand that it's a mature discipline, that it is art and science both, and requires a lot of professional judgment. We're trying to build credibility and their acumen around that HR process. Secondly, it's about sharing more data. We want to provide manager tools so that they can make more effective pay decisions and really get the context of pay to help with their conversations with employees.
The other side of the question is data transparency for us is not necessarily sharing all the data or all data that we have. It's about sharing the right data at the right time for the situation that is at hand.
So you talk about process over just data, but data is also key. And Keith, you mentioned using tools. Can you talk about what kinds of tools you're talking about? Is that an Excel spreadsheet or is it something more than that?
We have piloted using an Excel spreadsheet with managers to illustrate pay ranges and employee pay in the range. And we were successful with that. So we decided to actually build a web-based tool, a report for managers to be able to access that takes all of the pay range data and plots the employee pay on the range. And so we're talking about web-based tools that can be delivered globally to managers.
So we hear a lot with our customers that they're dealing with pay communication issues. Can you talk about how pay communication is different from pay transparency?
Pay communication is something obviously we all have to do. Pay transparency, we look at it as more of a tactic within pay communication. It's not just about data transparency in order to get a message across, but pay transparency needs to be part of the communication, again, at the right level for the situation that you're trying to communicate.
And why does Intel feel it's important to have pay transparency as a core element to pay communication?
Starting in 2007, we began an initiative to look at the perceived value of our pay, stock, and benefits. We wanted employees to really understand the value proposition of our total rewards package. Through that project, we were able to look at how could we influence the perception of employees around their total rewards package. We felt that we would have a higher engaged workforce, more motivated workforce, if they really understand everything that we were providing them. So we feel it's important because as a $43 billion corporation, we're spending about $10 billion a year on pay, stock, and benefits. Let's make sure we're getting the most out of it, and employees really do understand and appreciate what we're delivering.
I've heard you talk about the difference between value and perceived value, and it sounds like that was really an impetus for, in this effort in Intel. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Perceived value is a little difficult to measure. It's about people. It's about how they see things. Value, actually, in compensation and benefits, we're very good at measuring that. We're good with the numbers. But how do you determine whether an employee values their base pay actually to the degree that they have it? It's a bit tough. What we do is focus on employee surveys, conjoint surveys, and focus groups to really determine what are employees thinking about their base pay. Ultimately, there's really no way to actually compare unit for unit. Do you value a dollar as a dollar? But you're able to sense in the environment, are employees feeling satisfied and having a high degree of affiliation with the company through their pay, stock, and benefits?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we recognized is that base pay is very well understood by employees. They know how much they're getting paid. They know what their weekly paycheck's going to be. They know a lot of things about base pay, but there's also a variety of things that they may not know about that can create sort of mystery or vacuums in their knowledge. And if they don't have the right data or they're getting that data from an informal source to fill those voids, it can really begin to erode their confidence and their trust and their perceived value of the pay.
So I hear a great argument for pay transparency. What are some of the challenges to implementing pay transparency in an organization?
For me, I think there's two big challenges. One is sort of an inherent fear of the idea of sharing the data. what will managers do with the data? Are we sort of opening Pandora's box by sharing the data or getting into pay transparency? I think the other one is uncertainty about what kind of effect you can actually have. People are going to perceive their pay the way they're going to perceive it. Can we really influence something that intangible? So I think those are two big challenges. And actually a third one I'd throw in there is when managers, at least at Intel, when they were asking for more transparency, show us the data kind of questions, they weren't able to articulate exactly what it was they were looking for. It was a very general, broad-based kind of demand for more information. And we didn't know exactly how to respond to that. We're used to very specific questions. Tell us the problem you're trying to solve and we'll give you the information you're looking for to solve that problem. But we weren't really getting that here. This was very, very generic, very general. And we kind of had to take a leap of faith and say, you know what, let's start talking about what we can talk about, what we are comfortable talking about with regards to our process, and see where that leads us in terms of the pay transparency conversation.
And I'd add, part of that journey was the change management of understanding that all of our compensation professionals had to kind of embrace this philosophy, this strategy, and then our HR managers and ultimately our managers, they all had to go down this road to affiliation, as I call it, first to understand what we're trying to achieve with pay transparency and buy-in. So that change management was very important in helping us work through the obstacles.
And as a result of sort of opening the door a little bit more, are you getting fewer requests from employees for data? Are they less interested in the numbers that they thought they were interested in before because they have a better understanding now?
I don't know if we're getting fewer requests, but I can tell you that the stakeholders I work with, the conversation has evolved. Before we really started talking about what's the process, what's the C&B process, how do we get from market data to market reference points, before we had done that, there was an awful lot of conversation focused on the data itself, the specifics of the data. I don't believe the data. And once we stepped back and said, you know what, let's talk about where the data comes from, what's the nature of the data, what do we do with the data, what is the science behind what we do, what is the art behind what we do, and how do we get to those market reference points? Once they started to get to that level of understanding, the managers, the conversation evolved to one of how do I solve the business problems that I'm trying to solve based on the information I do have. So it went from what's the market data for this particular point, do I believe it or not, to are these the right structures for me to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay, so organizations who might be smaller than Intel, how did they get started with pay transparency?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, there are really two parts to it. Part of it is the process transparency, and really a company of any size can work on that. We all have our standard processes that we're working on to set market ranges and basically our base pay management process. So we can begin sharing that. On the data side, if you have access to the data, really you can start in Excel. There's nothing quite like throwing the numbers into a quick graph just to illustrate for a manager, sitting down, having a one-on-one conversation to show the data. If you're a corporation that can afford to build a tool, then terrific, but really it can be done with Excel and a simple conversation.
And would you agree when you are taking these first steps with pay transparency, maybe have leadership that isn't on board quite yet, or maybe has some fears about what opening that door will do within their organization, using some of those strategies that you talked about in terms of education and helping them understand your process applies from senior leadership all the way down, or does it start at a certain threshold within the organization?
So from my experience in focusing on some of the conversations I had in Asia, we started at site management level. So not at the very top end of the organization, sort of in the trenches in terms of the folks that are dealing with the questions that are coming to them from employees. And we focused on really building the manager's acumen with regards to the processes. So from there, we feel like we're able to expand downward into the organization. Again, the kind of conversations we'd be having with managers about what we do behind the scenes in C&B with the data may not be appropriate going all the way down to the lowest level employee, but to some extent, that information is appropriate. And when you go up higher in the organization, you probably have to reevaluate your audience and perhaps talk about different things as well. I think it depends on the types of situations that these folks are going to find themselves in. Site managers, line managers are going to be face-to-face with an employee talking about pay and making individual pay decisions. So how much information do they need in order to have confidence and clarity about the market reference points that C&B is providing to them? If they have that and they can consistently communicate that, then that's going to go a long way towards building trust in the organization.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for sharing your expertise and knowledge on this topic. I think for a lot of organizations, transparency is somewhat conceptual, and this really brings in a whole practical application to it and something really fascinating. So I thank you both. For World at Work, I'm Allison Avalos.